Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Julie and I will discuss an article that appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education on November 8th by Eric Hoover, entitled FAFSA Fiasco Changed the Composition of the First Year Class at Most Private Colleges. You're not going to want to miss that one. Our question from a listener comes from a student, and she wants to know about how she can find colleges with great indoor rock climbing options. And Hurley will join me for that. Our interview is part 205 with Gloria and Terry Crawford, helping us to understand glimpse videos and how they're being used in college admission offices. And our spotlight will be Fabrizio Delosio, the AVP of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And we continue to explore, how did UTK go from 17,000 apps to a couple under 60,000 in 7 years? And friends, you should know those full interviews have been up at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the interviews tab now since last Wednesday, if you want to hear them in their entirety. And we'll get the full Andy Strickler interview up this week on Early Decision as well.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark.
Ready to talk college?
Oh, yes. Always.
Always, always, always. Well, we're going to talk about an article today, and it's called FAFSA Fiasco Changed Composition of First-Year Classes at Most Private Colleges. It's by Eric Hoover. He's a fantastic writer. He writes for the Chronicle of Higher Ed. Came out on November 8th, 2024. So I'll just hit a couple of highlights, Julia, and then I want to get your thoughts. So it says nearly 3/4, 74% of private colleges said that the federal aid crisis changed the composition of their class. And that's based on a survey that just came out. It says 49% of respondents indicated that the FAFSA made the class more difficult for them to fill. And this finding was a National Association of Independent College and University, NAICU survey from 251 institutions. So it said 54% of colleges that responded to the survey said that their incoming classes were going to be smaller this fall 2024 than 2023. And about a fifth of them said that they enrolled fewer incoming students receiving financial aid. And 11% said that the class was going to be less racially and ethnically diverse, like for sure. Some other key reportings from the findings: colleges reported fewer FAFSA filings among students and more delayed decisions, especially first-gen students in need of money. Several colleges reported that some students completely skipped the fall semester due to FAFSA challenges. 58% that FAFSA challenges affected the amount of institutional aid that they ended up giving up. 80% of the colleges said that recent changes to the federal need-based formula greatly impacted the students, and it went on to talk about how some of the ways in which it impacted the students, like that change that they made where when you have two kids in college and it reduces the amount of federal money that you qualify. Colleges said that had a pretty significant impact. 81% reported a change in the percentage of incoming students receiving the Pell Grant. So it looks like it did kind of what the plan said it would do. Like 64% said they saw more kids getting Pell Grants, but then, and the Department of Education has said there have been 7% of more families qualify for Pell now than before. But it looks like it's really hitting more the middle income families in significant ways, as well as the delays in the FAFSA. So I'll just read one more thing here, Julia, and then I'd love your thoughts. It said, others said they offered more ways to try to attract and retain students, but they often overestimated their needs due to not having a FAFSA and had to tap into their own institutional resources. And then pretty much all of them were really upset with the Department of Education. Like 90% of them said that the department did not provide time. 88% that they were not clear about their information, and it was a FAFSA crisis, and it hindered their ability to plan for the fall. And basically, the department went on to say that they think they fixed things and they shouldn't have the problem this year. Anyway, that's my overview. What do you want to add?
Yeah, I guess in many ways I'm not surprised by any of that, and as much as I would have hoped it would have been different, but I didn't expect it to be different at all. So the good news obviously is that indeed with the expanded Pell eligibility, we are getting more folks who can benefit from that. And the article was still, cautious to say that we still don't, though, really cover enough
Sure.
with that group. And that's really more of an overall funding issue rather than a FAFSA glitch, right? Or a FAFSA issue. And then certainly, especially in my world, in the independent school world, we definitely have students who are high need and do go through the process of financial aid. But that's also really true of some of our middle income families. And so when a lot of middle income families heard about this change, it did exactly what we thought it would do. And it was really kind of, especially for my families that already had one child in college and they had been operating off of this idea that they would be able to, have two at the same time. So it did kind of take effect in some negative ways than we thought. And just the profound mess up, which is the biggest understatement I've ever said about this whole rollout. I'm actually, I guess, maybe pleasantly surprised that some private colleges didn't see a huge amount, but I would love to know the data on public colleges, right? And we did see, this year when I was doing my high school visits, so that's when a college comes and visits my my high school. There's a few public schools that had taken up the CSS profile this year because they had so many low enrollments because of the FAFSA debacle. So no surprises, but I guess I'm happy to hear that the expanded Pell eligibility did work well.
Yeah, I think the thing I've come to realize, Julia, and it's just really hit me in the last 6 months, is how much the FAFSA debacle fiasco impacted all colleges, private colleges, fairly selective colleges, schools with under 30% admit rates.
Right.
And a lot of that has come from me just talking with admission leaders. Sometimes it's been for these podcast interviews and just off the air conversations we have before we come on live, and the things that they say, or at conferences. But I first thought, okay, this is something that really hit regional publics, and community colleges.
Right.
I didn't realize how much it impacted pretty selective private schools that are denying more kids than they're admitting. How many of them, when they talk about the pressures they're feeling, they don't just go to the enrollment cliff or the war in college, but they talk about this. And one of the questions I've been asking a lot of schools is, how does your enrollment compare now to your pre-pandemic enrollment in 2019? And I've been surprised at how many schools are not at their pre-pandemic enrollment.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about schools that are on the verge of closing. It's just it's just almost what it feels like. It almost feels like colleges got out of COVID and it was like, you know what I mean? Nirvana. Finally, life is back to normal. So mentally they were in that space. And then this just hit them out of the blue and came out of
Yeah.
nowhere.
Yes.
And like sometimes like it's almost like they talk like it's almost harder than COVID was.
Yes.
And I think some of it is because like it was like a tsunami that you didn't think was coming, your way. So, we'll continue to give you guys updates on this, because the whole thing is going to be all right. Put up or shut up, like 2025. Like, let's see what's going on here. The people I talk to are not confident everything's fixed. I mean, it's understand there was such a breach of trust,
Right.
and it last year that I think it's a totally like show me, like, prove it to me. Like, I'm tired of taking your word.
Right. I will.
for it.
I don't know if I believe this, but an article, we're recording this on November 17th. An article came out on Friday that they have done 3 large rounds with tens of thousands of beta testing, and ED claims it's all looking good and that the FAFSA could launch potentially on November 22nd. But
Yeah, I'm hearing there's optimism coming out of and by the way, when Julia says ED, this is not early decision.
oh, right. Yes.
This is the education department.
Yes.
So we use ED for a couple different things when we're talking here, and
We do.
it's on my mind because I just did this big ED interview with Andy Strickler that that went live last Sunday, or Monday. So yeah, so let's stay tuned. But tough times in college admissions right now. Tough times in the financial world. Pretty difficult when schools had to tap their already limited institutional money sometimes because of all the issues with FAFSA. For those of you who don't know, FAFSA free application for federal student aid, you need to complete it in order to get access to one, free federal money from the Pell Grant program or the FSEOG, which are federal need-based programs. It also can impact work study. It can impact some of the loan programs like the federal direct student loan, Parent Plus loans, and then states a lot of times will use the program, the filling out the FAFSA, which produces what's now being called a student aid index, which is an assessment of the income and assets of the student and the parents to see how much you can pay. A lot of states use it for their state grants, and some institutions use the FAFSA for if they do have institutional need-based money at all, they use it to figure out what they can give. So, while it looks on one hand like, okay, this is federal and what federal low income, well, if I'm not federal low income, how does it impact me? But it actually does end up impacting everybody, because if schools end up shifting resources because they're not getting them there, then there's only one pot of money. It ends up impacting everything, like a domino effect. Cool.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you, Mark.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hi, Hillary.
Hey, how are ya?
Great, great, great. And this question, when it came in, I said, okay, this has Hillary's name all over it. I'm going to play the question, and then I'm going to start out, and then I'll have you chime in. Does that work?
Yeah, that sounds good.
We have a very unique question from a student about indoor rock climbing. So let's go ahead and play that question now.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm a junior in high school, and I'm looking for colleges that have indoor rock climbing, even though it's not a recruited sport, so it's hard to find information. Do you have any advice?
So friends, we love students, and we love students' questions. So thank you, Ollie. We love questions. And, one thing, regular listeners, you probably heard me say, one thing I love about my job is I love learning. I've always loved learning. Even when I was a little kid, I remember being 8 and 9 years old, we would travel, on long car rides, and I'd be like reading the dictionary. I know, totally nerdy. But I love learning, and I'm always learning from our families all the time. I'm learning from our listeners. I'm learning from our families. And as soon as I got this question, I immediately thought of a family that I co-counseled with Vince on the podcast. Sometimes we co-counsel. I've co-counseled with Julia and Susan and Linda and Lisa and the whole team. And so Vince and I were co-counseling with this family, and they had a very high level rock climber. Like, their student has been ranked in the top 50 for 3 straight years. And I'm like, okay, I know he knows this way better than me. Like, rock climbing is above my pay grade. I never did it. I really don't know the answer to this. without doing a lot of research. So I reached out and I asked him if he would share his thoughts and if I could share them on the air. And so he shared his thoughts, and I'm going to share them on the air. I'm going to read what he said, Hillary, and then I'll let you chime in and take it where you want to go. All right?
Yeah, sounds good.
So he says, it depends what they're looking for, honestly. If kids are really advanced climbers, not a single college gym is going to do the trick. This is because setting the routes for experts makes experience miserable for everybody else in the gym. It would be like Deer Valley going from groomed runs to extreme double black diamonds. A few would love it, but the majority of the recreational skiers, parentheses where the money's coming from, would be totally miserable. At that level, it really becomes about access to a bunch of gyms because the route setters can do their thing and have samples. In that calculation, Utah is through the roof. Same with Boulder. Colorado College, also great since there's outdoor and a couple gyms in Colorado Springs. Yoo-hoo, Hillary, that's you. I'll ask you to chime in a sec.
Yeah, that's us.
One interesting thing, that's you. One interesting thing about Barnard, for example, is there's a new commercial climbing gym on the new Columbia Business Campus. And then in New York City is a subway from some great gyms in Brooklyn. And there's a bunch of great gyms around Manhattan and Brooklyn. Atlanta has some amazing gyms, so check out Atlanta schools. Same with Berkeley for the same reasons. The gyms near Arizona State are epic, and there are great ones in Chicago and so many cities. Same with Raleigh. The gym near Harvard is great for Boston schools. The gyms around San Diego are next level. Brooke Rabito, did I say that right? I don't know this person, but I think I said it right. Brooke Rabito, the Olympian, went to the University of San Diego because there's so many great gyms there. See the trend? Cities are the key. Variety is the spice of life. Now, if kids are looking at less advanced, but just want big on-campus gyms without worrying about moon boards, challenging settings, more recreational fun, that's another question. I know a ton of schools are building those recreational offerings, and Stanford has a big one, and so do state flagships. And then he went on to say, here are a few of some of the on-campus ones, not an exhaustive list at all. Stanford, Utah, Boulder all have great facilities. They have gyms around them. Plus, they have great climbers and challenging routes to be set. Stanford has 2 high-end climbing gyms with more square footage than any other college in the country. The 28-foot tall climbing wall is home to Stanford climbing team, which has won the national championship. University of Wisconsin-Madison has a 2,285 square foot climbing facility with a mix of roped climbing. Penn State has a 4,167 square foot climbing facility with a mix of roped climbing and bouldering. So many more. And then the last thing he says, and then Hillary, I want you to chime in. Yep, these, it all depends what the students are trying to get out of it. He mentions that his student climbed at Dartmouth and Cornell, helped her stay in great shape. However, there are only a few in town. One big one right outside of Hanover. And then there's a guy about 15 minutes outside of Ithaca who is a pretty wild climbing setup, the random industrial area. So once you climb the same wall over and over and get stuck inside when it snows and don't have outdoor climbing like you do in the West, any of the remote schools will have the same kind of thing with some limitations, whereas schools in urban areas might not have their own gym, but might have access to 5 to 10 gyms within 20 minutes. But for recreational use, this list is amazing. Arkansas, Wisconsin, Penn State all have lots of recreational opportunities. So this is an example of a family who occasionally listens to the podcast. Also someone Vince and I co-counseled with, know this world way better than I do. I can't vouch for everything he said, but I have no reason to deny it. His daughter's been ranked in the top 53 straight years. Hillary, take it where you want to go.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this about me, Mark, but when I was in college, used to work for a rafting and rock climbing company.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So this is a little bit up my alley. And because I live in Colorado Springs, where there are a lot of climbers and a pretty serious climbing culture. And at CC, we have a pretty serious climbing culture. This is definitely something I'm familiar with. So I had 2 thoughts. My first thought was actually like, this would be a great question for ChatGPT. And so I plugged it into ChatGPT and in fact came up with like a couple really good lists from ChatGPT that sort of mirror what you heard. And first it was mostly like bigger schools, a lot of state flagships. And then I said, what about smaller schools? Like Middlebury and CC were on that list. And so it narrowed it down to some smaller schools that have get good indoor climbing opportunities. But the other thought that I had was, because collegiate climbing is governed by USA Climbing, so lots of sports, almost, all Olympic sports and some others have a national governing body called USA whatever. So USA Triathlon, USA Cycling, USA Climbing, USA Swimming, USA Gymnastics, right? Most of them are headquartered in Colorado Springs because this is where the Olympic and Paralympic Committee is. So I have a lot of familiarity with these organizations. So the second thing that I did after I went to ChatGPT was I went to USA Climbing. And from there, you can click on compete and then go down to collegiate series. And it'll show you the results from the most recent collegiate climbing championships. And you can go through there and identify what schools those students come from. So you end up seeing kind of a lot of the same schools over and over again. Colorado School of Mines, Colorado College, CU Boulder, Colorado State, UMass Amherst, University of Denver, Georgia Tech, Tufts, like there you see these same schools kind of popping up over and over again. And so I think that can be a really good way to sort of sort through and see what schools have students who are performing at a really high level in climbing. And then if you're interested more in, and I agree also with what your letter said about like urban areas tend to have more gyms. Like at CC, we have a climbing gym on campus, but it's really not meant for expert climbers. It's meant as an introduction to climbing. Our nationally and internationally ranked climbers who go to CC tend to climb at two of our city gyms. So those are just better, bigger places with more routes and more changes to the routes happening more frequently. So there's more variety. But I think that using your resources in terms of both like letting ChatGPT kind of give you some ideas, but also going to USA Climbing. And that would hold true for other, like if you're interested in triathlon, I don't think triathlon is an NCAA sport, right? But there are schools that are going to have really strong triathlon clubs. So go to USA Triathlon and see where students are doing triathlon. For other sports like that aren't NCAA sports, but that have an active presence on multiple campuses around the country, using the national governing body can be really helpful.
Hillary, that was awesome. I mean, I started with a question that I knew nothing to, and between your answers and our California friend, who, by the way, I want to thank, because when I was in California, this friend and his wife treated Vince and I to a delectable dinner. So thank you for that dinner, as well as for your detailed answer. And Ollie, hopefully you got some guidance there. You know, one thing I'm always conscious of when I have a question like this, I always want to know there's a range of schools, because I get nervous when I'm talking about the Stanfords, you know, and quite honestly, any school that denies more kids than they admit, because I don't know the academic level of the student. And I don't want to just give a long list of all highly rejective reach for all schools. And it's like, thanks, but I have no shot at any of these, schools. So one thing I did like about all those schools that we threw out is there's a range. Right. There's a range. You have schools on there like, your Arizona States and your Utahs and your Boulders
CSUs,
that are accepting, and CSUs that are accepting a lot more kids than they're denying, in case that's the type of student we have. And then if somebody wants the more competitive schools, and then, people have strong feelings about location and size and finances and lots of factors. So the thing that I kind of like about the list is I thought it was really diverse geographically, size-wise, difficulty of admission, cost-wise. And so hopefully, Ali, you found something on there that will meet your needs. But
can I say one other thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
The only other thing that I would say is that no matter what level of climbing you're at, there is a place for you in all climbing communities. That is the really cool thing about climbing communities generally, is that they are perhaps the most inclusive community I've seen on college campuses anywhere. They are equally happy to have someone in their midst who has literally never put on a climbing harness, as they are to be cheering on their friends who are internationally ranked climbers. And when you're in a school that has a strong climbing community, I think that affects the rest of the community at the school. I've seen that at Colorado College, where it affects how accepted and inclusive the rest of our students are, just because we have a lot of people who have that sort of climbing vibe about them, where they just love people. And so I don't know whether the student who asked the question is like a really competitive climber or is looking to become a competitive climber, but I just want to encourage you that you don't, like, if you go to a place that has a really competitive climbing presence, that there are also people there who are very excited to have you learn to climb with them.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I knew Colorado had good climbing. I knew you did, and I knew Boulder did. But you're such an outdoorsy state. And even that we're talking about indoor climbing, I think it's just part of that adventure that comes with Colorado that you see. Because I did take note, like in the course of our conversation, you guys came up, Colorado College, Colorado State came up, University of Colorado Boulder came up, Mines came up, and Denver came up, which are those are the 5 schools that I get the most applications from in your state, you know? And so I think that does speak to, do you think there's a correlation between climbing and places that tend to be more outdoorsy?
Yeah, I definitely do. But I also think that because climbing has proliferated in the ways that it has, you will have, like, I'm looking at this list of, from the championships, there's a University of Central Florida student who placed like 27th or something. You're going to have students who are from places where there's no outdoor climbing, but indoor climbing has become a big deal. And it's so easy to set up a climbing gym that in urban areas, you're just going to have a ton of opportunities for indoor climbing, whether you're in a place that seems outdoorsy or not.
That's point well taken, right? Yeah. I'm glad you added that. Well, this was great, Hillary. Thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Allie. And thank you, friend in California, for your comments.
Thanks, Mark.
Awesome.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, it's time for part 2 of my interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford. In part 2, Gloria shares the mechanics of how GLIMPS works and what costs are involved. Terry and Gloria answer the question, are there any students that should not submit a GLIMPS video? Terry and Gloria discuss whether some schools use GLIMPS as a test of demonstrated interest to see the student's level of engagement to try to ascertain or predict whether they may come. Gloria gives students advice about what colleges want in their GLIMPS video, and she shares some tips about how to know if what you are thinking about is too elaborate or too time-intensive. Listen and enjoy. Talk about the mechanics of how the video gets from recording to the colleges. Like, walk our listeners through that.
Well, it's actually quite easy. You just go to our website, initialview.com/glimpse, or you can download the app. And it's great because you kind of fill in some basic information and you can actually start recording, playing with kind of the platform without having to send it anywhere. You don't have to indicate what school you're wanting to send it to. You're just recording, and you can record as many times as you want. There is like a little 90-second countdown clock. It's not meant to give you pressure. It's just to give you a sense of where you are in time. And then you can just kind of re-record until you're happy with it. There's actually a place where you can send to a counselor or send to a trusted advisor. So you can actually, before you do anything with it, you send, and that person will get an email with a link, and they can actually review it and listen to it and see it. You can get some feedback on that. It's possible that your counselor or your parent or whoever is listening will say, that was amazing, that's great, that adds to your application, go ahead and send. At that point, they'll go back into their portal and they can send to 1 college or 10 colleges, however many they want to send. They can always come back to the portal and send to more. And then when they click send, it does cost $22 for the typical well-resourced applicant. And that is an all-you-can-send fee. So they will not have to pay that again if they send it to more schools. And then once they choose the schools, that is submitted, and it actually goes through us to colleges. We have given colleges a portal that they can log into. They get an email with the link that their processing team can add to a student file. And we are integrated with Slate, which is one of the most popular admissions officer reading software.
I think that's an understatement. They have a 1,900 college clients right now. I spent some time with them in Los Angeles, and they're
Yes.
coming on the podcast as well. But yeah,
Oh, amazing.
I was like, you guys, I hear you're up to 1,400. They're like, how about 1,900?
Oh, wow.
They're pretty
Okay.
much
Yeah.
dominating the
They
space
are
right now.
dominating the
Yeah.
space. Yes. Well, and that is one of the reasons why this makes it so easy for admissions officers to process, because they don't really have to do anything. They've turned it on. And then when a glimpse video goes through, it just finds, it maps and matches to the student's file. So it's sitting in the student's file. And that's one of the wonderful things about this. When people ask, like, how is this different than other videos or my own YouTube link? They don't have to click out. They're in the student's file, and they will click. If they see a little tab that says glimpse, then they can click on that. They can actually have it in the background while they're looking at all of your other materials, which is why I always say you're not telling your life story, because they have all their materials. They have all of your materials. All you're doing is adding voice and you're literally in the room with them when they're reviewing your file. So yeah, so that's how it works. Now, I'll go back to, if you are on any kind of free and reduced meal program at your school, or you're affiliated with a community-based organization, or you have like a College Board SAT, ACT waiver, you will just click through and it will be free for students who qualify for that. So it is meant to be no barriers here. We want every student to be able to record and send these videos.
And if somebody goes in later and adds more schools after the first initial batch, there's still no additional fee. The 22 is a
No
one-time
additional
only,
fee.
and no additional fee.
One time
Well, I know
only.
you guys enough to know you're going to be sensitive to under-resourced. I just know where your hearts are, so it doesn't surprise me to see you've set it up that way, which is great, which is awesome. I've been really enjoying them because as a counselor, I'm getting them. My students are sending them to me, right? For what do you think? And they're
Yeah.
delightful. They're adorable. In fact, there's a student I'm working with in Texas, and most students I work with, most of the meetings are Zoom, sometimes phone, sometimes it's a mixture. But
Mhm.
this is someone who, I've been working with them for about 9 months, and all of our meetings are phone. So when they sent it over, it was like my first time even seeing them, and it was really, really good. She started out singing a bit, and then she went into how important music was to her, and it was really awesome. I love personally getting them, and when I put my old admissions hat on, I would have loved something like this as well. So talk a little bit. Here's a question I have for you. A lot of the colleges are saying optional right now. And there's some debate in the counselor community on that
Yeah.
I'm a part of. And there's some people that are optional is optional, trust them, that's what they mean. And
Mhm.
then others are like, listen, when something says optional, you really should do it,
Yeah. No, we certainly
I'm sure
understand that.
I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard, right?
Yeah.
So if you were a college counselor, I mean, and obviously you guys are the founders of the product, but let me phrase it this way. Is it, well, I'll phrase it a couple ways. When should somebody not do it?
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, we don't think that any student should not. So why don't let me flip it just a little bit. I mean, obviously we think all students should do it. So it's
Sure.
not, we're not gonna think. And one of the ways that I think we'll flip it a little bit is I want to really empower the counselors or the students who might think that this is not something for them. And sometimes it fits this mold of like, well, I'm not an extrovert. So I don't want to go and do something like this. I want
I
to
have
just
somebody like this right now, by the way. It's
yeah,
exactly
I
like
want,
this.
I want to reassure people who think like that oftentimes the very best glimpses that we receive are from those who would consider themselves introverts, because it's very
Yeah.
thoughtful and very, very reflective, whatever it is that they might be sharing. And keep in mind, like, this is not this is not a group exercise. It's not something which is done while others are kind of looking on. You don't have to go and meet someone in person. I mean, there are some people that's actually the very fear-inducing thing, not so much recording a video on their computer. And so it really gives them a chance to talk about something that they care about and that they feel very passionately about, and that it allows them to, add this aspect of authenticity to whatever to whatever else that is in their application. Now, as far as the optional piece goes, I mean, there will be students that don't do this and do get in. So it's not the case that there's kind of sleight of hand here, that like we're being disingenuous there. Colleges they mean that when they say that. I think that if I were someone that is advising students, you as an advisor are actually in the very best position to help a student understand how they should present themselves here. And it does seem strange to me that advisors would not see it actually as an opportunity to help students, think about how to present themselves to adults. Adults are the ones with the power in the world, and so your ability to function as a college student and then as a young adult is going to be tied to your ability to present yourself to others who have resources. And so it's an incredibly critical skill to begin developing. And I think that is the way that advisors should maybe think about this, and to think about, okay, how do I, as an advisor, come up with ways to advise students? And of course, we can talk about that too. But the what are some ways that you can kind of make this part of your process? And I'll give you one other example to indicate, like, some IECs, they use Glimpse as part of their onboarding process, their own internal onboarding process. And what they'll say is, hey, as part of my onboarding process, I'd love to have you go record a glimpse. You can send it to me to take a look, and that's a way that I'm going to get to know you a little bit. And that's a very low pressure way to have a student kind of go in and do it. The student then sends it to the IEC, and the IEC gets to some interesting data about the student that then you can use as you're advising that student going forward. And of course, the student can re-record too, but maybe the student's already done a good job. You're like, hey, you're already done with your glimpse. You don't have to spend any more time on this, and you can kind of focus on other things. So it really is something. I mean, the reason it's growing so fast is that it is a broad tool that has applicability to all students that are applying to multiple types of institutions. They can use it for different reasons. And that's the I again, of course, we're founders, so we think that everyone should be doing this. We didn't create something that we think is bad for certain types of people. We think it's good for everyone, and something that is, when students look back on it, they're going to think that was an interesting milestone and something that I remember and maybe even gave me information. As I was forced to think about something, I realized that this is what I was really passionate about, and I could be very compelling in talking about this, and that impacted the choices that I made when I went to college. I mean, that is actually happening. So that's the way that we would approach it.
And the concept isn't new. I mean, we've had Zimi on the podcast twice. Zimi was doing 60 to 90-second videos probably 6 years ago. I mean, their company's completely gone into more of these online chat communities, right? But we had them on, their CEO on in 2018, and that was resonating. So there's been an appetite for the concept for a while.
I just wanted to add, so whenever people ask me this, I'm like, optional equals opportunity. And I really believe that, it is an opportunity, and if a college doesn't have it, they don't have it. They don't have it in the way that they review you, and that's fine. They will just look at everything else that they have. But for you, optional means like this is another way for you to present yourself. But what I really like to say is this is an advocacy tool, because actually the first reader, the second reader, and your committee member, the counselor that presents you to committee, they are actually your advocate. They want to be able to present you and say, I recommend admit. And if they have your own voice in that process, how much easier is it for them to advocate for you? To be able to say, this is why this student checks out for all of the boxes that we have. But also listen to this 30 seconds, listen to this 10 seconds even. Like if there have been multiple occasions where an admissions officer comes back to me and says, we pulled up the video during committee so that I could convince everyone in that room that this was an admit. So I just wanted to add that, because I think if you see it as an advocacy tool, then you're less kind of feeling like, oh no, this is a must do, but it is more of an opportunity where I get to be a witness, a primary witness in that, that room of evidence.
Yeah, I'm a really strong advocate. I'm going to try to convince every one of my students to do it for all of the reasons you've mentioned, and an additional one. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this, although I know you couldn't mention schools, but as you know, colleges are struggling with yield. It's inevitable. The harder it is to get in, the more schools people apply to, the more people apply to, the less times they're going to win because they have more competition. I talked about this recently on the podcast, and yield has gone from 36% to 30% from 2014 till now. That's a big difference to a school. That's a lot more students they have to admit to get the right number of heads and beds. So schools are using very, very sophisticated ways to try to figure out which of these applicants is serious about us. And one of them is to have a series of optional things and to just see, okay, who's committed enough to us to do it. Could be an optional essay, optional interview. This is the question. I think I know the answer. I'll be surprised if I'm wrong, but have you had any schools, because they're going to talk to you, right? Have you have any schools say, this is also kind of a little test of interest, like to see who's serious about us? And that's another reason why we like it. Because I would be shocked if that's not happening. And I would think that probably some of them would tell you that.
I mean, in today, I mean, you're exactly right. And that yield is absolutely a component of the college application process. College fundamentally is a match. The same way there's a match on a dating website. It is a match process in college, and you have to have both sides. To like each other. There has to be, to continue the metaphor, there has to be a love connection between both. And so you should students don't have to be so cognizant of this necessarily, but any advisor or IEC needs to understand that really anything, any type of data that admissions officers could be collecting about a student is and can be used to determine how serious is this student really. So I'll give you an example. One admissions office told us, like, look, if a kid comes and signs up for an info session and they don't show, we think they're not interested. We note that. And so, of course, the flip side of that is what your advice to any student is like, look, if you say you're going to go do something, you go and do it. You don't just kind of be real flippant about this process. This is your entree into, the adult world to some degree. And you need to be serious about it. And that is something which is, I think the value that IECs can provide to the process is them helping students understand that, your behavior is being watched, and, it varies from school to school and, to different degrees, but it is that you should be assuming at all times that there's absolutely your interest and, let's call it seriousness, like your seriousness is being evaluated when it comes to a particular school. So there's no question that yeah, I mean, schools can be using this. I mean, we don't know in any particular case, how schools do it. I mean, we do know that that within Slate there are tools that schools can use for querying different pieces of data, and that is absolutely a big piece of kind of the value that Slate can provide to colleges. I mean, we've of course, in the initial view, we've gone even kind of one step further with the whole interest piece, where for regular decision, we've even incorporated tools that were originally used on dating websites, but where students during regular decision, we give them these 2 virtual stars that they can give to their 2 top choices, and that is absolutely valuable. I mean, it's different from maybe traditional kind of demonstrated interest where colleges are doing things behind the scenes. I mean, this is where the student is really in control. and the student can be strategic and, like, hey, these are my two top choices, and I'm going to send 2 stars during regular decision to kind of stand out in the regular decision pool. But that is we have to all understand when we're kind of describing what this market, we'll call it a market, and then it's just a place where an exchange is happening, that it is two-sided. There needs to be a connection between both, and both sides are trying to use information to their advantage. And so that is something that you can be thinking, like, look, you do want to, if these additional essay and maybe a glimpse as well, that is a sign of interest. And then if you send one, then you're able to tell. That's just one more way that you're showing the college that you're an active participant in this process and that you're serious about their institution.
Yeah, you talked about the 2 stars last time, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant because I just know from when I was on the admissions side, like how important it is that you get indications of yield. It's like just incredible. I tell students all the time, like, when you say it's sort of hard sometimes to know what your own mercurial 17 or 18-year-old is going to do, well, trying to predict the behavior of 5,000
Right.
18-year-olds that you have to bring in for your class, and you can't under enroll because then you're fired and there's the budget. You
That's
can't
right.
over enroll because then where you're going to house them, and you have tremendous pressure from all your stakeholders who are looking at the qualitative metrics to make sure that the class looks stronger than the year before. So that's like a lot. There's a lot there, right? So I I think some of the times we've had some of our most candid talks about this, or some of the episodes people have appreciated when we get into predictive modeling and some of those other things in some of our conversations. And so I think that for that reason alone, I think students should not pass up an opportunity. But I'm glad you led with what you led with, which was the student voice is an I like how Gloria put it, right? It's an opportunity. It's really
Yeah.
an opportunity. So now I want to talk about something that I personally find challenging as a counselor, because I'm all about Glimpse. I love it. I love looking at them. I believe in it. I think students should take advantage of the opportunity. But what I struggle with is, I know from the conversations I've had with admission officers, they don't want this to be a 10-hour production.
That's right.
They don't want to add that into the many things that students are doing. However, that's the first place especially high achievers go. They do. And the things they talk about are very elaborate a lot of times because they want to stand out. And I have a hard time knowing where to draw that line. I've been kind of doing it around time, like because sometimes I don't know when they pitch me ideas. Is that like a 10-hour thing or like a 2-hour or less thing, right? But in fact, in full transparency, one of our co-hosts, Julia, I reached out to her to get a second opinion from a student I'm working with. I'm like, does this feel too contrived, too much manipulation, too much massaged over, or does this feel natural? So what the student like makes charcuterie boards and donates them like for charity. So it's not like inauthenticity, like this is what she does, but she had the idea of like going to the store and getting the ingredients and filming it and then coming back and then having the production, and then you'd have to edit it so you could see bits and pieces. And so the question I had was, is that too much? Or is that her being her and you giving a glimpse into who she is? It's not something that she's going to be able to do in 90 minutes. So how would you advise on that situation, something like that? Like, that's a hard part for me, is when the students have these ideas that have creativity and they're not talking about somebody that they're not. Like, this is kind of who they are,
Right,
but
right.
it feels like a pretty big production to me. And I know from the conversations I've had with the mission officers that they don't want this to become another 10-hour project. So give me some
Yeah.
counsel on how I'm supposed to advise in these situations.
Well, the one thing is, on our platform, you can't actually edit. So that was intentional. The way that we built the platform based on feedback from admissions officers for that very reason. It's like, we cannot have it where they produce something and they edit and they record here and then splice and, add special effects, all of that. We don't want any of that. So now, that being said, you can actually get creative in 90 seconds with a phone. We have people who are at a homecoming game or at school and kind of interacting with others in that 90 seconds. And that can tell a lot, actually. So, the charcuterie board being an example, I've actually seen a few videos where it can be artfully done, where a finished product maybe is in the video, but talking about the motivation behind it is actually the voice that you want to hear, because it's not necessarily the shopping that tells anything about the student.
Sure,
I think at the end of the day, does this 90 seconds give some additional information about me that's not anywhere else in the application, whether that be kind of, again, a character trait, and when I say character trait, I mean like things like kindness and collaboration and leadership, but also I'm also talking about kind of like intellectual curiosity. One of my favorite Glimpse videos from last year was actually a student who just sat at his desk, was very, he's not your typical like extroverted person, but he talked about his journey of selling things on platforms. And he did have a couple props, because he started off by selling like those little Funko Pop, characters on eBay or something. And so he did have a prop there to kind of talk about it, but he talked about how it wasn't profitable, how he spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. And then he like moved on to different items and different platforms, and finally he came to the realization that concert tickets were actually the most profitable, and he shared about what kind of concerts, and then at the end saying that he's actually earned enough money to support his college education as well. Now, all of that was beautiful, done in less than 90 seconds, and in my mind, if I'm an admissions officer, I'm basically thinking, wow, there's entrepreneurship here, there's grit, there is like failing and coming out of it. There's like a lot of little traits that are coming out of this very short story, but it's a journey that didn't need extra bells and whistles. I didn't need to see the platform. I didn't need to see even the little character. It was a fun moment to kind of make the connection, but he didn't even need that prop to be able to tell that story. So, I think that if I were the admissions officer listening to this story about the charcuterie board, I would want to know a little bit more about the why.
Sure.
As opposed to seeing the how.
Those whys are so important. I'm always preaching the why behind the what. Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Gloria and Terry Crawford on Glimpse Video. Hope you'll join us next week for the next segment.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, in part 2 of my interview with Fabrizio Delosio, Fabrizio talks about the markets where UTK regionals are located. Fabrizio talks about the markets where the regionals are having the greatest success. Fabrizio talks about when they decide to phase out trying to penetrate a market. Fabrizio talks about the factors they use to determine which markets to try to penetrate with a regional recruiter. Fabrizio talks about the mantra UTK lives by when it comes to reaching out to the state of Tennessee. Fabrizio gives the breakdown of applications that are out of state versus in state. Fabrizio talks about what the admit rate was 7 years ago and what it is now. Fabrizio and I talk about the fallacy of judging a college by its admit rate. Fabrizio talks about some of the criticisms that come with all of their growth, and he explains how he's handling it. And Fabrizio talks about how they revamped their whole communication system and how that is one of the biggest things that's led to their growth. And finally, Fabrizio talks about how they revamped their tour guide and how they're seeing fruit from their labor from these changes. Fabrizio talks about how they started a counselor fly-in program and how they created a counselor advisory board. Fabrizio explains why more schools are not doing the counselor fly-in program that they're doing. Fabrizio talks about how they select which counselors they're flying in. Listen and enjoy. Talk to me about the markets that you're in right now. Which ones have been most successful for you? And if you don't mind sharing, which ones are maybe the verdict's out on, whether or not this is a good market for us.
Yeah, I'm gonna forget some markets, but
That's okay.
I'll give it.
I know there's a lot. Don't you have like 40 or 42 regionals, something like that? 36, something like that?
Yeah, it's in the 30-ish
30s?
range.
Yeah, okay.
And that includes our in-state region.
Sure,
right?
sure. Yeah.
We've got someone in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, more specifically, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. We've got someone in Virginia. We've got someone in Maryland. We have a staff person in Florida. We have 2 people in Texas. We have someone in Chicagoland. We have someone in Denver, 2 in California. I'm probably forgetting.
Atlanta, I'm sure you probably have somebody.
Atlanta, we've got someone. Yep. We have actually 2 people in the Atlanta area.
Texas,
we've got 2.
Mm-hmm. And which markets have you seen the biggest surge? Would you say, like, boy, this regionals, I'm sure I'm glad we moved into this market.
Yeah, Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
Illinois has been a big market, and there's market things that are happening too, right? In terms of investment in education, or different political things also that drive some of this. So it's not just the recruiter, but they definitely are a piece of it. We're seeing huge growth from the Pennsylvania Mid-Atlantic area. Texas is blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned California earlier. California is in our top 10. Virginia. So kind of a sampling across the board.
When you're picking a market, do you just base it on looking at the total addressable market, like the size of the population there? Do you look at, hey, where are we already getting applicants from already? Do you look at some of the other things, like, you look at Illinois, the in-state, both Illinois and Pennsylvania have very high in-state costs for someone to go to their flagships. They just do. This just has to do with the state appropriations, right? And like that can play a role, because cost obviously ends up being a factor. By the time you throw in some merit aid, people aren't looking at a cost differential in many cases. So those are very expensive public schools, especially they just are, Pennsylvania and Illinois. So I don't know. Do you look at factors like that?
We do. We look at factors like cost.
Mm-hmm.
We look at information from the assessment companies about how many are students more likely to go out of state when we're looking at out of state markets, right? So they're mobile.
Yeah.
We look at mobility. We look at academic profile of schools and districts, because we don't want to recruit students that we're not able to admit.
Sure.
Right. So we look at that.
Where do you get that out of state data from?
From a lot of the assessment companies.
Okay.
And then there's also market data you can get from census-like data. We leverage census data in that. So what we've tried to do is kind of part of answering your question, but just in general, is there's a lot of science that goes into this work, right?
Yes, I know.
We don't have the resources to be everywhere all the time. So we need to think about what our resources are, and how do we work with those students that are the best fits for us, and that we're their best fit, right? Because it's got to be both ways.
That's awesome. All right, keep going down your list. I was fascinated by that one, and I noticed you really put a pretty big emphasis on that one when you and I spoke at UTK as one of the major ones for the growth.
Yeah. And then we also have regionals, like I mentioned earlier, in state. So we have a team in Memphis. Memphis is an important market for us. First, and it's a distance, right? Like it's closer to go to Atlanta than it is to go to Memphis.
I know.
Right?
When I was on that trip, there were some Memphis counselors, and they're like, hey, how come so we did 10 Tennessee schools and no Memphis schools. Some people were like, hey, how come they didn't do any Memphis schools? Well, that's a long ways, That's a long ways. They would have added like another 4 hours.
Yeah. So Memphis is really important, right? There's a lot of diversity in Memphis. There's some excellent students in Memphis, great schools. Nashville, we've got a team in Nashville of about 4 or 5 people. And then we've obviously got our Knoxville staff.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure we cover the state. And so we have a little internal mantra, which I'm happy to say on the podcast, right? Like,
Sure.
as the public flagship of Tennessee and one of 2 land grant universities in the state, we want to make sure all Tennesseans that are academically prepared to be successful here have an opportunity to be here. That's really important. So I've kind of have a mantra of win Tennessee, right? Like, we want to win Tennessee. Now, that doesn't mean if a Tennessean really wants to go to school B in North Carolina and that's the best fit for them, like, they should do that, right?
Sure.
But we don't want them to feel like they don't have a chance to be here because of space or interest from out of state, right? So first and foremost, we need to win Tennessee.
And your Tennessee apps have surged too. Like, how, when you look at that 17,000 to tad under 60,000, what percentage of that growth was increasing Tennessee apps?
Yeah, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can tell you our overall app numbers, roughly over 80% are out of state and the rest are in state.
Wow, I didn't know you're as high as 80. Talk to our listeners, like, what kind of acceptance rate does that result in from when you came to where things are now, in state, out of state, Fabrizio?
Yeah, so the admit rate back 7-8 years ago, in state and out of state, was essentially the same, right? It was around 89%, 88%. Now, I think this past cycle, our admit rate approximately was probably like 57 or maybe 64% in state, 60% in state. Out of state, it was like 34%, perhaps 35%.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the programs later. We know even lower for some of your programs, right?
Yeah,
you're seeing things like that. Do you almost laugh at, because you know this, you're in this business, you know that when your admit rate is lower, people think you're a better school. Is that almost humorous to you? Because, Rick Clark will talk about that, right? Like, when he got to Georgia Tech, the admit rate was in the 60s, and then now it's, low teens out of state. And he's like, we were a great school then,
Right.
People didn't think we were a great school. Some people didn't think we were a great school because our admit rate was in the 60s. See, you understand the psyche of the public, but is that almost humorous on one level to you?
Absolutely. I can't say we're the same school we were then.
Sure.
Which is a good thing, right? We all need to be getting better. But we were an excellent school then. And that's why I came here, like I mentioned, right? I wanted to get the word out about what a wonderful place this is to learn, study, and become a volunteer. It's funny. And sometimes, and I get this question all the time. Well, maybe not all the time, but I get it enough where it's irritating enough that I kind of shrug my shoulders a little bit. UT, you guys are just trying to deny more students so you can have higher selectivity and move up the rankings. So I like to take this opportunity to tell your listeners that is absolutely not true. Folks also ask, who are you trying to be as a university? And my response is, we're trying to be the best version of ourselves.
Love it.
We're running our own race. We're not trying to become like school A, B, C, or D. Though excellent schools, we're trying to be what we think is best for the students that we tend to attract, for our in-state population, and we're running our own race. It's not a competition.
And I'm really glad you took some time on that acceptance rate, because it's a constant challenge for me with families I work with, and even people immediately coming in and saying, if a school isn't at a certain acceptance rate, I won't even look at it. And just think, Tennessee was at 89%. Just think if you would have said that, I'm not looking at a school with about a 90% acceptance rate. Look at what you would have missed out on, right? So I just want listeners to think about that a little bit. So that's awesome. So what else do you feel you can attribute the miraculous improvement? That's pretty stunning, really, to go from 17,000 to 60,000. So it's not all regionals.
No, it's a lot, and there is no silver bullet in this world, right? Everyone's always looking for the silver bullet.
Yeah,
there is no silver bullet. I would say our communications to students.
And how much of that is direct mail, email, even improving the experience of the tour guide and the info session, admitted student visit program? Like, what do you break it down when you say communications?
Yeah, it's all of that. I was going to focus primarily though on timing. So we did high school visits and things like that, but when we went and licensed names of students through the testing services, we would typically buy seniors. Or if we bought students that were maybe juniors, we would mail to them late, right? And we both know that's way too late, right?
Sure. So you got earlier on into their pipeline and got them into your admissions funnel.
Yep. And so now we license sophomores, right? We have lots of pre-college programs on this campus. So we work with the colleges that have lots of those programs to make sure that we're getting that information. So we can start talking to them about Tennessee. And if we're not a fit for them, no harm, no foul. They move on and go in different directions. But when I talked about place and people, when a student comes here for the summer and takes a pre-college program, 9 times out of 10, they're involved. They're interested.
Yeah.
Right. Because they've seen this place. They've been involved. They've gone to the farmer's market on Thursdays and gone on the Tennessee River and spent some time in Dollywood. And so we want to make sure that they come back because of the place and the programs.
I have a story for you on that. And it's a little bit of a dagger. So I went to Michigan State.
Okay.
And when I was on the visit with you guys, a tour guide I had, he was from Chicago, and his whole family was like Spartans, and like generations. And he was totally into it because it's a big time school spirited place. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, as well. Tennessee is the same thing. But he did a pre-college program, and he talked about how it sold him, and the rest was history.
Oh, wow. And you never told me that. That's great.
Yeah, no, I didn't. He was great, by the way. Yeah.
And then our tour program is phenomenal. And what makes it phenomenal is our students, right? So again, going back to what a leader, a volunteer is, a Tennessee volunteer. A volunteer is someone that wants to make a place better, someone that's a servant leader, someone that is engaged in their community. Like, can you think of a better tour guide than someone that has those types of values and have that kind of motivation in what they do? So we typically have 400, 350 applications for 30 or 40 spots every year in our tour guide.
Wow, is that competitive?
And it's harder to be a tour guide than for me to get my job.
That's what I tell our tour guides. That's crazy.
So, they have a big part in kind of highlighting our experience when someone comes to campus.
I have to ask you, because I ran a tour guide program with 90 tour guides back in the day. How do you get that many applications?
You know what? We really don't work that hard at it. Like,
wow.
Because these are students on campus that are leaders, they're involved in lots of clubs and activities, and their classmates are like, hey, if Abby's doing it, it's got to be great.
And it's a paid job, right? It's a paid job. Yep.
Yeah. It's paid.
Yeah. Wow. So you upped your tour guide program. You started getting into the youth student search, targeting 10th graders. Were some of these things that you had just seen work in your 14 years at College Board, and you kind of were pretty confident because of the role that you had there working with a lot of colleges? Like, I've seen these things work at other colleges. There's no reason why they won't work here. Or are you just trying stuff by the seat of your pants and sort of seeing what would work? Yeah.
No, it was the former. I knew those things would work.
Yeah.
And especially at a place like Tennessee, like we talked about earlier, it was already a great school. We just the word wasn't out yet. And so we also did more programs with counselors. So you mentioned the Sweet Tea Tour that you were on.
Sure. Yeah.
We've done more things like that. We have a counselor advisory board. In fact, they're going to be here in 2 weeks, and they helped give us advice on marketing, what resonates with students. They helped us during test optional with that pivot. And then when we went back to testing, they go through our tour program. They go on a tour, they give us input and feedback. They're key partners to helping us elevate the work we do. We have counselor fly-ins, right? So we do 2 fly-ins a year Fly-in will be next week. We have about 20 counselors from across the country and the state coming to be here for 2.5 days to see campus. Those people go back to their communities, kind of what we talked about earlier, and they talk about it. And it creates a buzz. And I say buzz, not in a not very appropriate, nice way, but an exciting, like, this place is someplace you really need to check out because there's a lot of cool stuff happening.
I think this is such an underutilized resource by schools, and I realize there's some budget there, but I just look at myself. I mean, I could even use you guys as an example. Like, I mean, I refer you so much more than I did after having been there. Probably because I can articulate certain things with passion and I can identify, like I did not realize the level of sports enthusiasts you have. And so, like, when I have someone that sports, I want to go to a spirited place. I think you guys, even the whole SEC, honestly, like maybe you and LSU, like, I mean, my daughter's a Georgia alum.
Okay.
And as far as just the level of intensity, you've got Georgia beat. And you guys have had more success recently, but you guys haven't tasted like serious success in a while. Like, I can only imagine what would ever happen if you guys won a national championship or even, I mean, it's insane. So, but the point is, I see such a return, and it's not always something that can be traced. So I think sometimes schools don't know if the investment's worth it. I did a Wash U fly-in in 2017, and I've had 9-10 kids go there since then. And a lot of it is because just my ability to articulate the place with passion because I've experienced it. Why aren't more people making that investment, in your opinion, for reason? Just because it's a big cost and they're looking at tight budgets, or they're not sold on the ROI, or they don't know how to do it right? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a little bit of both. Big costs, not sure about ROI, and then there are a lot of work to do, right? Like you need to have staff focused on making sure that we provide an experience that is worthy of those folks spending 3 days on campus, getting to learn campus. And it's really a thoughtful process, right? Like we try not to think about it from the lens of what we want to tell them, but what do they want to hear about? Like, what's important to them? Kind of like what we do with students, right? Like, what's a sophomore need to know at this time versus a junior at this time? And so it's money, it's time, it's energy, it's resources. And then will it pan out in terms of, will it have the impact we're looking for? And I'm cool if a counselor comes to a program like ours, goes through it and gets back and says, hey, Johnny, I was at Tennessee, great school, but it might not be right for you, right? But there's another student that as a result of them coming to this fly, and they've said, hey, Tennessee's not on your list, right? It's all about getting the right fit. Like, that's why counselors do what they do when they're advising students on colleges. And that's why we do what we do, right? We don't want students here that are not a good fit and that don't want to be here, right? And I think it's important that I think fly-ins, I think our visitation program, I think our communications, I think our recruiters, like that all helps make sure that doesn't happen as often. Sometimes it's going to happen. We just know.
I think sometimes when I see schools open up program, this is just my opinion. Sometimes I think they're not as discriminatory as they could be in terms of who they invite too. Like you really, in order to leverage your return, you need to pick people that either have, a lot of influence, or their trajectory is one where I can see, oh, wow, look at your growth. Because that makes all the difference in the world, right? In terms of, not everybody's equal in terms of how much they can, blast your message out.
Yeah, I think the influence is really important. And that's a key factor we look at when we look at advisory board members and fly-in folks. Because, again, we can't do this for every single counselor across the country. But, man, if we can get the right counselors that are in the right rooms and having the right channels to communicate, like, that's really powerful.
So how are you picking that, Fabrizio? Obviously, 20 is a small number. Yep. I imagine there's a lot more than 20 that would like to come. What are you using to decide who you're going to pick there?
Well, this comes really back full circle to our regional recruiters, right? Like we have them nominate counselors that they know that, because our regional recruiters are also involved in like the regional ACACs and things. So they know who the rising leaders are on the counseling side, people that are well connected and have great relationships. And then honestly, counselors that really want to go to a campus to learn about it.
Sure.
Right? Like this isn't just a trip, but it's something that's going to help them do a better job, impact their work with students. And so our regionals nominate counselors to myself, and I sit down with some of my senior leaders, and we look through the nominations, and we try to, just like you shape a class, we want to make sure that we have enough Tennessee counselors. And then what do we want to do out of state? Do we have a couple from the West, right?
Sure.
I need someone from California. And so we try to look at gender, look at all those different pieces, types of schools, public, private, to really build a cohort, because hopefully if we're doing this right, they're not just learning about UT when they come for a fly-in or if they're on an advisory board. They're learning from one another, right? They're peers from different schools across the country. And that makes the experience even that much better.
That's awesome. Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Fabrizio Delosio. Hope you join us next week for the next segment. Friends, I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina, having a great time, and it's actually my birthday today. But let's talk about Monday's episode. You'll hear part 2 of 4 on what I feel is one of the best interviews I've done in my 7 years on this podcast. It's everything you want to know about applying Early Decision 1 and Early Decision 2. And it's with our own co-host, Andy Strickler, who's the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College. And it's part 2 of 4. Then we will have the final segment of my interview with David Hawkins, who's the Chief Education and Policy Officer at NACAC. And David is sharing what we can learn from their survey of 1,000 high school students to see what they think of the admission process and what they think about college. And friends, remember, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude, will determine how high you soar in your life, with your career, in your relationships. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.